Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes, and welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, which is set to be ramblier than usual. Today's book, If You Can't Read, which, if you can't read, then why are you here? Well, I suppose you could be looking for audiobooks, but a fair number of the books that I talk about aren't going to be audiobooks, so I'm still not really sure why you're here. That was awful of me, wasn't it? So, St. Petersburg, A Cultural History by Solomon Volkov. Solomon Volkov was born in the 1940s in that which once was Leningrad, which before being Leningrad was Petrograd, and before being Petrograd was St. Petersburg. And St. Petersburg, Moscow, not St. Petersburg, Florida. So, this is a book that I got from a friend of mine who was trying to get rid of a whole bunch of stuff before she headed out to Whitehorse in the Yukon, and she was just trying to get rid of stuff, and I thought it looked interesting, and it's taken me this long to get around to finishing reading it, so there you go. The thing about this book is that, philosophically speaking, I always consider art history to be history, because art is inextricably tied up and bound up with the historical periods it's in. That could be music, like Tchaikovsky, which I will put on here because it's pertinent to St. Petersburg, since Tchaikovsky was from St. Petersburg and is considered to be one of the key, for lack of a better term, we'll call him characters in this book. Solomon Volkov tells the history of St. Petersburg from its inception in the 1700s, when the Emperor Peter the Great decided to build this city because he hated Moscow and wanted a capital that he didn't hate. And everybody predicted doom and gloom and death and destruction. And so it's had a very, very storied history. But the history of St. Petersburg, when told through the art, it becomes very much more personal, because it becomes about the personal interactions that Pushkin had with St. Petersburg. It becomes about the personal interactions that Tchaikovsky had with St. Petersburg. So this book has only what you could call 6 chapters, each of which is incredibly long, as you may have guessed, given that this book is 500-odd pages long. And each chapter covers, you could say, an era in St. Petersburg's history. The first chapter is the inception, and is mostly about Russian literature, Pushkin and Dostoevsky. Because Solomon Volkov, for all that he was a musician in his youth, that he went to the academy in St. Petersburg when he was much younger, and tends to, and clearly is trained in terms of music, he tends to be very, as he puts it in this book, logocentric. That is, he talks a lot about the literature, about the novels, about poetry. And so the first chapter really, really focuses on period Russian novelists. The second chapter is where we bring up Tchaikovsky. The second chapter is talking about the Queen of Spades, which was an opera. And the thing is that Tchaikovsky is that each of these artists, Volkov repeatedly, when referencing these artists, he comes back again and again to artists that spoke of the destruction of St. Petersburg, of its dissolution, of it falling to pieces. When he opens his book, one of the first things that he talks about is Pushkin's novels, The Bronze Horseman. Now, this is this is the Bronze Horseman. It's a statue that was created by the sculptor Falconet, and it's one of the most central pieces of sculpture and art in St. Petersburg. Um, and it it's it stands as a symbol of the city, and in point of fact, not only does this book very much open with this particular piece of art, but it closes too, because it closes with Pushkin, with the quote from Pushkin, "Where are you galloping, proud steed, and where will you plant your hoofs?" And the whole story, the story of the Bronze Horseman that's referenced, is a story about a man who challenges the Bronze Horseman and goes mad in the process and dies, and the way that the city overwhelms him and kills him. And it's a constant theme in the literature of St. Petersburg. This is a painting that was brought up early in the book, Terror Antquus, which is a painting by Leon Bakst. And this is a favorite of Volkov's. And again, you look at this, and this is about the destruction of Atlantis. You see here this particular goddess that we see at the center of the painting, Artemis, not Artemis, what am I saying? Aphrodite. It's apparently about the triumph of love over destruction. But in the background, you see here this destruction of the city, and rising waters and the destruction of St. Petersburg. It's not merely a theme in literature, it's a theme in this book. And you see this again and again when he gets to talking about his favorite poet. And his favorite poet is Anna Akhmatova. I have here a painting which he mentioned specifically in the book. Again, I'm going for stuff that was mentioned in the book. This is by Altman and Nathan Altman. And Anna Akhmatova is another one of those people who predicted the end of this, who predicted the end of St. Petersburg, who predicted death and destruction and sadness, and he follows Anna Akhmatova. He gets past his chapter on Tchaikovsky, many of whose works also again reflect this fear, this sense that something terrible was coming. And he gets to Anna Akhmatova, who wrote a great many poems about sacrifices she would make for her city, about things that she would do in order to prevent its end. And he parallels her life with the city. He parallels the fact that both of her husbands were executed by the Communist Party, by the fact that her son was taken by the Communist Party, and that she was not only for a very long time persona non grata with the government of the Soviet Union, but that her suffering and the trampling of her life and her art were very much reflective of what happened to St. Petersburg. Note, this is about St. Petersburg. This isn't about Russia. This isn't about the Soviet Union. It's not about Moscow. This is specific to St. Petersburg. He follows up talking about Anna Akhmatova with talking about George Balanchine. And so I have here a picture of two people performing Balanchine's Agon. The thing about Balanchine is that Georges Balanchine, which is his actual name, he got renamed Balanchine in the process, he's one of the emigres from Russia to the West, because there was a period when Russia bled artists leaving for the West because they couldn't stand being the pressure of being under the Soviet yoke. They couldn't stand the depression. They couldn't stand the starvation, which was not merely physical but intellectual. They couldn't stand being told what to write or believe or think, and to have everything that they did be questioned. And Balanchine was one of them. Vladimir Nabokov was another. But Nabokov was a writer of novels, and novels don't generally make for great pictures. So let's go back to the cover for a moment. One of the next chapters in this book, after George Balanchine, we get a discussion of Shostakovich, who I don't have any music by. But I do have some Mussorgsky, which is one of the parts, of one of his pieces. I'll have actual information and references and stuff in my description below if you actually want to know. You can probably get a better recording somewhere else. The thing about Mussorgsky, and the reason why I picked him, is not just because this particular piece of music is about catacombs and being depressed, but because Mussorgsky, right around the time Shostakovich came to the St. Petersburg Academy, Mussorgsky had a sort of a return. Rimsky-Korsakov, who had been sort of the leading light at that moment, his star began to fall, and Mussorgsky was rehabilitated just in time to begin to influence Shostakovich and other young musicians at the time. And Dmitri Shostakovich, chapter 5 is about the Leningrad of Dmitri Shostakovich, because it's during the George Balanchine chapter that we get the moment that the Soviet Union changes the name of St. Petersburg from St. Petersburg to Petrograd because they wanted it to be more Russian. They wanted it to be proper and Soviet. They didn't want the imperial reference of the city that was named by Peter the Great. They didn't want the German reference that came from the fact that it was Petersburg. So they changed it to Petrograd. But that wasn't enough. And only a few relatively short years later, during Dmitri Shostakovich's chapter, during his time, we get the change from Petrograd to Leningrad. And that's the period when you have the Second World War in this book. That's when you read about the madness that descends on the city, and about the period when the city was laid siege to by Hitler. The starvation, the fact that thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people died in that city, and the way that this city was, the horror that was going on, gets inextricably entwined with Shostakovich and Shostakovich's art. Following that, we get a return to Anna Akhmatova, her poem Without a Hero, and we bring the city up to the present. We bring the city up through the years of further Soviet travail, of the loosening of the noose, of the Soviet Union falling apart. The book ends in about 1992. And this book, which started with Anna Akhmatova and Shostakovich and Pushkin, ends with Anna Akhmatova and Shostakovich and Pushkin. And it's circular, and it's a lovely book, and it talks about the history in such a wonderful, complete way, and I can't recommend it highly enough if you have the patience to finish it. Thank you all for coming.